Good morning. This is Whitney from Starhearth Astrology, and I'm here to talk about Virgo season. I am a few days late talking about this. I'm transitioning from doing my lunar quarterly recordings to try and do kind of full seasons. But we'll still talk about what the moon is doing because the tension that the moon creates between the angle of the moon and the sun is going to kind of show the rising and falling action of every month. So we'll definitely still touch in on that. I'm just switching gears a little bit. So getting into Virgo season, we shift from Virgo season into Virgo season from Leo season. And that shift kind of pulls us inward and towards more practical matters. You know, fire signs are always followed by earth signs, and so there's this kind of this great swell of passion and enthusiasm that happens in the fire signs, and then the need to ground that into a practical way, right? So Sagittarius is followed by Capricorn, Aries is followed by Taurus, and Leo is followed by Virgo. And so in Leo, we have kind of the exaltation of the authentic self and the heart, right? And it's really on stage. But then as Virgo responds to it, the response of Virgo to Leo has to do with, okay, well, what is the duty of the self? And as we're turning from kind of the height of summer and Leo season, which is the home of the sun, we turn towards fall, and now we need to really concern ourselves in a practical way with the harvest. So, okay, things have culminated, we've had this season of abundance, and now we need to start thinking about the future. So kind of the feeling of concern and worry comes up in Virgo season because Virgo has a sense of what is ahead. Also, my 5-week-old baby is here on my chest as I record this, so you might hear some of his little sounds. You might have just heard that one. So we really kind of turn towards this sense of being concerned for the future, understanding that where we are now is not where we will always be, and to think about that, and to also think about the sense of duty. So, right, so once we have that kind of that great song of the authentic self, which swells up in Leo, suddenly we start thinking about the quality of the self, and what we owe our lives to, where our duty lies, and even in a sense of how can we shape that self towards some ideal. Virgo is ruled by Mercury, which is our access to our thinking. It's a shape-shifting planet, and so similarly, Virgo is the sign, according to Stephen Forrest, the sign most willing to sacrifice parts of itself for the good. And so we kind of see that this kind of divine judgment of the self, which obviously has a shadow. It can get way overbearing. It can become masochistic. But in essence, it's looking for the purity and the good, and it's dedicated to something beyond itself. And then you see that dedication in Libra become a kind of reverence for the other, or a constant response to the other. So let's get a little deeper into it. So whenever we're beginning something in astrology, we're not really beginning. So it's the beginning of Virgo season, but this Virgo season is obviously in the context of everything else that's happening this year. So we have these live storylines that we kind of come in. We're saying that the beginning of Virgo season is the beginning, but we still have to check in to where we are in the transits and the cycles of different planets, which obviously don't pause all at the same time in a way that we can have a beginning. Similarly, in our lives. Even when a child is born, you know, it begins somewhere in its parents' lives. We are never without context at this pure beginning. And I think that's really important to remember, that there are things going on around us, even at each new beginning. I remember in college reading John Milton's epic poem, Paradise Lost, and reflecting that, right, kind of the chief, or maybe the originating sin of the fallen angel, Lucifer, was that he forgot that he came from God. And I am not speaking in any religious context, purely in a literary context here, but that was interesting, that it was when we forgot our origins and we forgot where we came from, that we were able to kind of break away from things and not see things as clearly. And then, right, the irony that we obviously we don't remember our own births. And so that gives us a kind of freedom, but is also dangerous. Anyway, so I'm going to kind of talk about where we are at the beginning of Virgo season. So we're kind of in the middle of these Mars squares. When Virgo season began on August 22nd, Mars moving through the tail of Aries, squaring our big three, Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn in Capricorn. Mars will square all of these in forward motion, and then it retrogrades in the middle of Virgo season, so it's going to move backwards and confront all of these squares again, except for with Saturn, which I believe Mars will, oh no, that's the third square. So it will square them all again during its retrograde in September, October, and November. We also have all the outer planets retrograde. So we've got Jupiter retrograde, Saturn retrograde, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, and Chiron, if you count Chiron, all retrograde. We have a few about to go direct. So Jupiter will go direct in Virgo season, Saturn and Pluto will go direct in Libra season. So they're about to change their direction. We also had Uranus go retrograde in Leo season, so we still might be feeling some of the kind of sudden shifts that can be associated with Uranus stations. And then we also start in the first quarter of the lunar month. So we had the Leo new moon happened on Tuesday the 18th, and the sun went into Virgo and brought us into Virgo season on Saturday the 22nd. So we're still in the rising action of the new moon when we start into Virgo season. So I talked a little bit in the beginning about the Virgoan archetype, asking the questions of what is purity, what is grace. The myth of the fall is one that strikes really deeply into the Virgoan archetype, whether you look at the fall in terms of the Persephone myth, and being taken from this pure state of innocence and being suffering an initiation through the rape and being dragged down into the death realm with Pluto, or into Hades, depending on if you're using the Roman or Greek name. And then kind of that cycle in Virgo, or with Persephone, of being on the ground, on the earth, with her mother, or being queen of the underworld. So Virgo can, and people with intense Virgoan signatures in their charts, so the sun or the moon in Virgo or Virgo risings, kind of feel that pull up and down within themselves, because Virgo is very good at noticing those places of imperfection, or those places where we miss the mark on what we are trying to be. And usually Virgo is trying to be something, has some kind of ideal in mind. This can show up in children as a real desire to be good. It's pretty good for obedience. And then later in life can become a dedication to a certain ideal. This can also create kind of this duality in Virgo, which is either it's going to be perfect or I'm not going to do it at all. So you can see Virgoan spaces in your life, or Virgoan people swing in between kind of like meticulousness and extreme focus and really good attention to detail, to then becoming completely overwhelmed with that standard of excellence and kind of being in this more sloppy place. It will also really depend on where Mercury is in an individual's chart, kind of how the Virgoan space manifests. And if someone has the sun in Virgo, then Mercury can only be in Leo, in Libra, or in Virgo. And you can definitely notice the Mercury and Virgos because they are just better at it, as Virgo is the sign both of Mercury's rulership and its exaltation. So we've got 12 signs in the zodiac, but we have 6 pairs of signs. So a good way to understand a sign is to look at its opposite and understand that they're on the same spectrum. And Pisces is the opposite sign to Virgo. And I won't get too deep into it, but what I love about this pair of signs, and also what I kind of pity in them, I think it's really hard to live in the Pisces and the Virgo ideal kind of in our culture, because these signs, more than any others, being the feminine, mutable signs, are less concerned with ego, which is not to say that in kind of their shadow qualities, or when these archetypes get overblown, that they can't have egos. They can have incredible egos dedicated, identifying with a lot of self-sacrifice, or identifying with the martyr, but that in kind of the essence of them, being mutable, they are about responding to what is outside of them, and they're both really about service. And I see these signs as a lot about how to respond to the divine. So Virgo sees God in the details and is going to understand God, and you can insert any whatever theologically palatable term here, the universe or the name of whatever God. I don't think it matters, and that's again part of the mutability, is that it's not attached to naming one thing. But I don't have a negative association with the term God, so I'm just going to use the term God, and hopefully that's okay with you. Right, so Virgo is going to feel God in the detail. So in cooking, in tending to the world, in understanding the world, in putting things in order, right? Virgo is going to want to categorize it. And Pisces kind of moves the opposite way. Pisces is going to feel God through the intuition and through the oneness of all things. So it's not seeing things in their detail, but feeling things as a whole. They are both very sensitive. I think Pisces maybe more in its feeling of being part of the oneness, Virgo in seeing things in their details. But neither of those kind of show up in a way that wants to have power over things, because both of them respond to. Which is not to say that people that have these signatures in their charts are not going to want to have power. Obviously, Mars can be anywhere in the chart. Saturn can be anywhere. So that Virgos often have a lot of Leo in their charts. And so that's a particular tension to deal with. Pisces can have a lot of Aries in their chart. So again, that tension with fire. I think of this as a season for prayer. Prayer being a daily thing we do, so kind of concerned with our daily participation in the world, and kind of the tiny tasks that we do. Right? If Leo is the season where we connect with our heart, Virgo, we connect with our hands and what we do with our hands. And traditionally in prayer, depending on whichever religion that you are associating with, it will have a position for your hands and your body in prayer. But also, right, we use our hands to bless the life around us. And how we treat it, how we interact with it, is with our hands. And so I think it's a really beautiful time that really kind of curves around the bulk of the year. We're 9 months into the year with Virgo. And so we can kind of take stock into where we are. I think it's really beautiful, the high holidays of the Jewish tradition, the Jewish New Year, and then also Yom Kippur, kind of the Day of Judgment within Judaism, usually takes place either in Virgo season or around Virgo season. I think this year Rosh Hashanah might be in Virgo season, but Yom Kippur, which is a week later, is not, or maybe they're both not. Someone can correct me. But really the sense of celebrating the turning of the year, and then what happens a week after that at Yom Kippur is that God judges us and decides what will happen over the next year. So this day of repentance, and I think it is just really beautiful that it takes place inside of or near to Virgo season, because Virgo is a sign that will repent, that is willing to look critically at themselves, and doesn't have a lot of defensiveness around that. So when we're looking at Virgo season, I just wanted to give this little map of kind of where we are in terms of the lunar month. So we've got the sun, we've got the sun right here. When the sun entered Virgo, we were coming up from the new moon in the first quarter of the lunar month, rising, and then it breaks this line. This line represents the separation in the hemicycle. So below the line is the dark hemicycle, working towards or just after the new moons, and that is when things largely take place internally, or are more unconscious, more outside of our conscious control, which the sun gives us. And then above the line is the bright hemicycle, where things might happen externally. So I think it's important to look at the month. The bright hemicycle happens between August 25th and September 10th. And that is going to be important because right before September 10th, Mars is going to go retrograde. And a lot of stuff happens, especially in the third quarter, which is going from the full moon to the quarter moon. And then we have a Virgo new moon towards the end, and then the sun goes into Libra again at the first quarter of the lunar month. And so we will get into that stuff in a few weeks. Okay, so what is happening this Virgo season? So the first quarter, which is where we started, on the 22nd, we had Mars square to Saturn. And a lot of people have written about this. There's a lot of great stuff about this because this is also the beginning of 3. The second one will also happen in Aries and Capricorn, but then the third one won't happen until 2021 in Taurus and Aquarius. So the resolution will not look like how this tension is building. And I talk a little bit more about that in my Saturn and Capricorn video, which you can go back and check out. So we have Mars square to Saturn, which can feel like tension between kind of our mission and what we're trying to do and the external circumstances or the people in charge of that. So kind of violent, and we've seen that in in the tension in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and the ways that different people have responded to that, the ways that our different political leaders have responded to that. I think kind of the some of the rhetoric from the Republican National Convention definitely felt like Mars square to Saturn, trying to, just viewing things in this way of like, we need to meet all tension with force, is a real Mars square to Saturn. Then we had on Tuesday, Mercury trine to Uranus, which can spark new ideas. Venus opposing Jupiter, which is probably the gentlest of these oppositions, but brings us into the series of oppositions. Venus is moving through the end of Cancer, so she's going to oppose the big three in Capricorn again. And so this is the first one with Venus and Jupiter, which is probably going to be the easiest one. And then we had the moon square the sun, which brings us into the second quarter, rising up towards the new moon. So on the 27th, which was Thursday, we had Venus trine Neptune. We came off of a summer of Venus squares to Neptune. So when Venus was in Gemini and during her retrograde in Gemini, she was squaring Neptune, which was bringing into stark relief stark relief only upon reflection afterwards. Delusions of grandeur, idealism that might have missed the mark, but also really potent wishes, some of which were probably realized. Then we have Mercury trine Jupiter on Saturday the 29th, and that they are both in earth signs, and I really like these trines while Mercury is in Virgo to the Capricorn planets, because it's so practical of how do you work with all of this heaviness in Capricorn, and what little things can we be doing, and how can we Virgo it? How can we break a task down into bite-sized pieces and kind of arrange them and figure out what needs to be done and on what schedule, and how do we kind of realize the Capricornian dream, or figure out how to dismantle the Capricornian establishment. It can work for both sides. Virgo is a great partner for Capricorn because they can both set their minds to really practical tasks, but Capricorn is going to be that initiating energy. Sometimes Virgo can get really bogged down in the details and misses that cardinality that would really move it forward, and can really get mired in things, but the Capricorn kind of keeps its foot on the gas pedal to move things ahead, whereas Virgo can kind of do all of the management pieces to make sure that things are not forgotten in that in the Capricornian monolith. Okay, so then we have Venus opposing Pluto and Mercury opposing Neptune on Sunday the 30th. So the Venus-Pluto opposition, those can be when Venus-Pluto has contact, just things can get a little bit haywire in relationships. And often I notice this is kind of a trauma button. As often when things are difficult in relationships, it's about past trauma. But so often we are responding to things that are beyond our partners, which is to say bigger than our partners, bigger than the situation. And then it can feel very life or death with this contact with Pluto. So watch out for that. That's kind of a tripwire for relationships. When Venus opposes Pluto, kind of, our values and what we hold dear has to confront kind of the size of our nightmares and our overwhelm. So that can, fears of abandonment come up. And we just kind of get stuck in these trauma spirals. So if you feel yourself kind of getting overwhelmed, maybe take a step back and realize that, with this Venus Pluto opposition, we're just more sensitive for towards what we fear in our relationships, and we can really get a little bit erratic with that. Venus can take that pretty hard in Cancer because she's so sensitive. Although when she moves into Leo, she gets pretty angry and prideful. So we've got that quincunx to look forward to. Then we have Mercury opposing Neptune. So this has happened since 2011 when Neptune went into Pisces. We've got an exalted Mercury in Virgo doing its best work, planning out its best life, and then it has to run into an opposition with Neptune that in a lot of ways is the opposite of Mercury, that's blurring the boundaries, it's taking you away from clarity. So again, this could feed into kind of getting your mind all tangled in fears and worries or trauma with the Venus-Pluto opposition. So this is a day that you could really kind of go off the rails in what you're feeling and what you're saying, and then you might, next week be like, what happened? Yeah. So if you want to just be careful around other people, and meanwhile, I don't know, watch somehow this, these transits remind me of like Pan's Labyrinth, something like really dark and beautiful and kind of nightmarish, has a little bit of the surrealism from Neptune, and is a little bit over the top in terms of violence with the Venus opposing Pluto. I have a much more pedestrian Venus and Mercury in Leo that get kind of freaked out by that level of stuff. So I probably won't indulge in that, but that would be a constructive way to honor those transits without kind of becoming an actor in them. Then we have a Pisces new moon, which happens on the 1st, but it will actually happen on the 2nd if you are in Central Time or on Eastern Time, because it happens at 11:22 p.m. Where I am in Mountain Time. So it could be the 1st or the 2nd because it happens, right straddling those days depending on your time zone. And I'll release a video, hopefully today, but maybe tomorrow, on the Pisces new moon, where I'll go more in depth onto what that looks like, and the energies of the planets that are participating in it, and what that could feel like, and how to kind of honor that space. So I won't get too much into that, besides to say that, right, while the sun is in Virgo, the self is really working on Virgoan themes, right, in order to balance that. As always happens, the more unconscious part of the self, or the more intuitive part of the self, symbolized by the moon, has worked its way all the way into maximum fullness in Pisces. And so we're at maximum tension for the month. Oh, and I realize it says Pisces new moon right here. That is incorrect. It is the Pisces full moon. So, right, we're at maximum tension between these two dualities, right? How do we feel kind of ourselves as a participant in the whole, or do we break everything down into its pieces? And this can also, this can be emotionally overwhelming, because Pisces, right, is willing to give in to that emotional overwhelm. And because Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, which is now in Capricorn in its fall. So there can be this feeling of disheartened quality, or maybe a kind of pessimism to this full moon of, looking at everything that we've been through in 2020, which is quite a lot, and just feeling a little bit of despair. About being there. it's difficult. And then at the same time, we've got Mercury trine Pluto. So very practical Mercury in Virgo that is really feeling that hard look, or able to communicate. And right, it's a trine and it's Mercury in Virgo, so it may have some ideas about what to do about it. But this moon really holds space for the heartbreak of where we are. So there can be a lot of that. I have a little grunty baby. Then the next day we have Venus opposing Saturn. So we're probably going to feel that together with the new moon, because that is a transit that's building. And the Sun trine Uranus. So we've got a little bit of different stuff going on, especially because Venus is going to oppose Saturn at 6:15 a.m. and then the Sun trines Uranus at 10 after 8. So these are happening really close to each other. The Venus opposing Saturn can definitely fall into the pessimism and that feeling of overwhelm and just your heart being crushed by the reality of the way that things are. Venus trying to make things better, trying to bring some cohesiveness and some togetherness in Cancer, and Saturn keeping on the hard road. And the Sun trining Uranus kind of being like, fuck it, right? So the Sun in Virgo, being really willing to negotiate what the plan is, and Uranus really invigorating, really opening up and dismantling our system of values as symbolized by Taurus. So there's a little bit of break free energy that happens right after the new moon or the full moon. So, falling energy from the full moon might look a little bit more like dismantling things than creating them. So I'd look out for that in your own life, especially wherever Virgo falls in your chart. But also, I'm sure you'll be able to see it in the political sphere. Then on the 3rd, we've got Mercury trine Saturn. The 3rd quarter, so from the full moon to that, to the half moon that we'll get, it's really packed, right? You're looking at these transits, there's almost something every single day. And this is in the bright part of the hemicycle. So if you're looking for the busiest part of the month, it's really the 3rd quarter. We've got Mercury trine Saturn. This I actually really like, right? We've got Mercury in Virgo working it out, kind of doing the most practical stuff, breaking down the details and checking in with the big boss of Capricorn, Saturn. So this would be the day that we'd really be able to kind of put things into action, or at least get a sense of everything that needs to be covered by our plan moving forward. Then on the 4th, we have Venus square Mars. And Venus square Mars can be sexy with that tension, but I think it's going to be a little bit difficult because we've got Mars in Aries charging ahead but slowing down because Mars is about to station retrograde really right at the end of the 3rd quarter of the month. So it's really, really slow. It's getting frustrated. It's losing its forward momentum. And then it's being pushed by Venus at the tail end of Cancer, who is, really needs some help, having just undergone all of these oppositions, is moving towards the end of Cancer, and is really trying to prioritize not the mission of Aries, but kind of our family or those in our inner circle in Cancer that contribute to our emotional wellness and our sense of emotional security. And Aries doesn't really care so much about emotional security. So there can be some tension there between the lovers of Venus being like, come home, protect us, and Mars being like really kind of tired and exhausted on the battlefield of Aries. Then on the 5th and 6th, we get some shifts. So Mercury goes into Libra. And Mercury in Libra, so now Mercury is in Venus's sign. So it's going to, instead of being so focused on competency and detail as it is in Virgo, it is going to go more into diplomacy. So really, how do I communicate this in the most diplomatic way, which can sometimes be sugar-coated to the point of kind of a verbosity that loses the meaning. So Libra is going to try and say things gently enough that it's not ruffling any feathers. And sometimes the meaning is lost when this happens, especially with Venus in Cancer. But Venus goes into Leo the day after. And Venus in Leo is a lot more hot-headed. We've got a morning star Venus fresh out of her retrograde, and she will be bossy and know what she wants in Leo. There's also a flair for drama. So Mercury can kind of get pulled that way. I believe Austin Coppock said that Mercury in Libra, nope, I got that totally wrong. Sorry about that. Disregard. He was talking about Venus in Libra. Yeah, so we kind of move into, we've got Venus, what we want and our desires moving into a fire sign, so we can get a little bit more pushy about that. And that pushiness could contribute to the tension of Mars retrograde, because Mars is going out and getting what we want, and it's being frustrated about that. So we're kind of stoking the fire, literally, with the fire signs, Venus in Leo and Mars in Aries. And so that feels a little bit scary to say, given the fires burning all over the country. Hopefully the places where the hurricanes are drying out, and the places where the fires are getting water. We cross our fingers and we pray during Virgo season. Okay, then we have the Sun trine Jupiter, which is this kind of boost of expansiveness, although right in Earth signs, that's going to be a little bit more like a food cache to keep going. And so we have the opportunity to get kind of reinvigorated by our hope, our sense of hope. Although with Jupiter in its fall, that can be really like we understand kind of the holy work of picking up the pieces, which is part of the end of 2020, because then Mars stations retrograde. And so when Mars is retrograde, we have to deal with the frustration of not being able to put our full power into things, and often feeling a sense of powerlessness and really having to confront what is worth fighting for in the house that Aries occupies in your chart. So this can become a place of conflict if we are avoidant about conflict, or it can become a place where we need to kind of tone ourselves down if we are if conflict is something that we create and comes easy for us. So that will be important to notice those themes. Also, with the squares from Capricorn, we can really feel the tension between those two houses. So wherever Capricorn occupies in your chart, creating tension with wherever Aries occupies. And that's kind of the battle of this fall. Then on the 10th, we've got the moon square the sun, and we enter the 4th quarter. So now we are approaching the new moon. We are releasing kind of the tension. And so even though a lot of stuff is happening, you may notice that it's happening more internally than externally, or you may be integrating it. You may be more able to integrate it because you're not quite as frenzied as we become in the bright hemicycle of the moon. So we have Mercury opposing Chiron. In Libra, Mercury really, this is a really good transit for saying what you need to say to someone. Mercury is going to want to do it gently, but Chiron knows the medicine of the self in Aries. And so, you know, Chiron is trying to heal the wounds that we have about our self-concepts in Aries, and really get us back on track into what our mission is. And so Mercury can kind of, hopefully, right, the ideal of this transit is that Mercury can express that in Libra in a creative and beautiful way, that hopefully uses the tools of the law, or right, of higher thinking in the air sign to kind of communicate that in a way that liberates the self. Then we have the Sun opposing Neptune, and this, when the Sun opposes Neptune, kind of the boundaries of who you think you are can get a little bit blurred. So right, suddenly this, a lot of self-limiting beliefs can kind of dissolve. And so I think that's really the potential of this transit. But it can also feel like you're losing yourself a little bit, which would be the more negative side of this transit. Then Jupiter will station direct on the 12th. So we've got Jupiter moving forward again. That will be really nice, because it means that, right, the kind of review of wherever Sagittarius and Pisces occupy in your chart, Jupiter rules those signs and has been moving backwards. Now Jupiter is going to station and move forwards again. So those areas of your life can actually pick up speed again. And I know for me, Jupiter rules my 11th house, kind of the community and friends and people that I'm connected with, and Jupiter went retrograde right around the lockdowns. And so I've been mostly in isolation. And so I'm looking forward to Jupiter moving forward again. I don't think I'll be going to big parties. Jupiter's still in the house, my 12th house of isolation. But moving outward and being able to connect a little bit more, hopefully, is coming. And so wherever that falls in your chart, things could start moving in that area again. Not right at the direct station, but as Jupiter picks up speed, moving direct over the next few weeks. Then we have Venus square Uranus. So this, especially because we've got this in fixed signs, this can be very jolting, Venus in Leo, square Uranus in Taurus. And this can be kind of upsets or big shifts in relationships, or kind of in what we decide we want and what is of value to us. Then we have Mercury square to Jupiter. And that, you know, so Mercury is moving quickly through Libra, squaring, and Jupiter, it will also move through those squares to Pluto and Saturn. And so this is going to activate, you know, this axis that we have of the cardinal signs and the tension that we have between Aries and Capricorn right now. Mercury is getting into with Libra. And so Mercury, you know, and Libra wants everybody to get along and wants to be able to find the compromise and the negotiation, and it's kind of entering the battle. Then we have our Virgo new moon on the 17th. Again, I'll make a special video just for the Virgo new moon, where we kind of get a chance to go inward, check in with the Virgoan area of our lives, and get in touch with what's really going on there. And if you listen to my new moon videos, really have a time of listening for what renewal is really being called for in that area of our life. And then it's beautiful because it happens with the Sun trine to Saturn, which I think, right, really gives us clear sight into how the self can respond to that new beginning. So we've got a new moon with the Sun trine to Saturn. And so I think that will really give us this beautiful opportunity, because that will mean that the new moon is also in trine to Saturn, to really have a new beginning that's grounded in slow but meaningful work. And then we have Mercury square to Pluto This can be a point where communication breaks down. I think it'll be interesting to look at what's happening politically and the different things that are trying to be negotiated, like a new stimulus package, or even with schools reopening, Mercury kind of representing part of education, seeing some big outbreaks of COVID and really having to deal with that situation. So it could peak around there, or, you know, it's not peaking because it's just after the new moon, but we can start seeing the beginnings of, oh, okay, a crisis around this issue is building. So that can happen. And then, right, you know, maybe a decision will happen when Mercury hits that square to Saturn, which it will a few days after that. But it won't do that in Libra season. So on the 22nd, the sun goes into Libra, and we shift from kind of our Virgoan meticulous accounting and thinking of what to do with our resources to really responding to the people around us and how we are harmonizing with them. So it's not just the material world around us that the earth signs can be more concerned with, but the social sphere of the air signs. I just wanted to go back to this graphic to kind of round things out. So again, we begin just after a new moon into Virgo season, building to our Pisces full moon that happens on the 1st or the 2nd. Falling action, very busy, coming down to our Virgo new moon. And then picking up speed a little bit right as we enter Libra season. So again, you can expect kind of the busiest time of the month to be in between these two quarters, which will be August 25th until September 10th. And then things building to August 25th and things kind of resolving between the 10th and the new moon on the 17th. Okay, so that is Virgo season 2020. Let me know what you think. It's great if you can hit that like button, and great if you want to subscribe to see future videos. And if there's anything, you know, if you have any kind of response, I am a double Virgo sun, Virgo moon, and so I'm happy to change things around if you have suggestions. I really appreciate that. Otherwise, have a great Virgo season. I'd love to know your experience if you want to leave that in the comments. And I will have those lunation videos for the Pisces full moon and the Virgo new moon up while we're in the next week or so. Yeah, so be well.